よはじねよはじねはよはじねよはじねあべによべによべによべによはいへよべによべによはいへはよはじねよはじ
Welcome back to
ね
Voices for the Earth, and today's guest is Vince Schiffert. So you can just start off by introducing yourself, just some background about yourself and I don't know.
Oh, um, try it. My name is Vince Schiffert, Tuscarora Nation Turtle Clan. Uh, 61 years old. I pretty much lived here in the res my whole life, except for the few years that I went to Syracuse University and kind of dropped out and lived in Syracuse for a couple of years. Uh, I was growing as a kid. We always lived on a farm. Uh, Grew up hunting, fishing, trapping, and running around the woods. Played sports, lacrosse, wrestled through high school and in college. Went to Syracuse. I was interested in listening to stories and going to our community events and paying attention, trying to help when I could, but I didn't get around too much. My dad ruled with an iron fist at home where he always had to stay home and work, and when he went to work, that's when we took off and did our things. So yeah, I was an outdoor kid, and which all of us boys were back in the '60s and '70s. Had a fun childhood. Uh, but yeah, so now I'm back and married, got a house on the res, and trying to continue with farming and outdoor stuff. Just retired from teaching at Tuscarora School. I was a language teacher and then a culture teacher, and I also taught Tuscarora and Haudenosaunee history at the high school. I just retired last year, so that's about it.
So just to add context for the viewers, he was my teacher throughout elementary school and high school.
Yes,
So
great student. I enjoyed
I
having
hope
her
so.
class.
So my first question is, can you explain your knowledge of the environment?
um, I think probably just being in the environment, just growing up outdoors, experiencing it every single day. It doesn't matter what time of year, what the weather was. We were outside all the time. Like I said, all the boys were. I don't know about the girls, but it was all brothers. I had one sister. She was the youngest. She didn't come along for quite a while. She's like 12 or 14 years younger than me. But being on a farm, you're outdoors, having gardens. You're working in the garden and you're weeding and paying attention to all the different plants and learning. Uh, Going out gathering berries and walnuts and stuff and hickory nuts in the fall and hunting. It's just a hands-on knowledge and learning from your dad and other folks in the community. Um, so I think that's a big part of it. I was lucky to have a neighbor, Norton Rickard, who was like a mentor to me back in those days, and then as an adult, I kind of start hanging out with him quite a bit, and rekindled that relationship. And he was really a mentor during those 30s and 40s, I guess, or maybe 30s, 40s, 50s. I don't know. It was a long time, but I learned a ton from him about farming and the outdoors. And big man, Patterson. I learned a lot about medicines from him and hanging out with him. And he also was a farmer. But just a lot of people in the community that, um, and my father-in-law, Lee Hemlock from Newtown, Cattaraugus, just learned a ton about medicines and plants. I've been married to his daughter for now 28 years. I think he's 92 now. He's the elder of that community. Learned a lot from going in the woods with him all the time. So I've been very lucky to have some good mentors and elders to learn from. And, the other super important thing is just being out there, enjoying and seeing stuff. And, you can learn a lot from a book, but you got to be out in the environment itself. And,
Mm. So how have you noticed the environment change throughout the years?
well, here at Tuscarora, there was a ton of farmers and farms when I was a kid. And a lot of our folks out here, men folks, they farm for a living. You know, they had jobs as iron workers or roofers or in the plants, but then they came home and fired up the tractors and they grew, you know, wheat and oats and corn, field corn, and it was all for market and for selling. Baled hay, you know, they may have had animals, you know, they had their own gardens, and so they grew their own food too. And you know, our Ganahaget, our Tuscarora corn they grew, but you know, there's just a lot of farming. Plus, the non-native farmers, some folks rented their fields out. But as nowadays, there's hardly any people farming, and so that's a big change. Is seeing those farm fields turn into shrubs and bushes, and then trees, and you know, it's succession has taken over most of the fields. You know, it's people aren't farming for the market anymore. People still have gardens and grow Ganahagerod, but white farmers aren't out here anymore. They were told not to. They couldn't use chemicals anymore, and they just couldn't do it. One guy tried. I give him credit, and he tried it for 1 year without using chemicals, and he couldn't do it. It too much took too much time. He couldn't keep the weeds down, so he's gone. But yeah, so that's a big change in the environment. Seeing that go back to forest land, that's probably the biggest change I notice.
And so, what's the thing that you're concerned about most with like climate change and how it's affecting where we live?
Hmm. Uh, I mean, like one thing that I noticed with climate change is when I was a kid in our, you know, you always had to be worried about a killing frost in the fall that ended your garden. Most things would with an analog. Uh, most things would die on that early killing frost, could be anywhere in late September, early October. But now we really don't get a killing frost till almost November, and so that's different. And I know it really affected growing dry beans because you need that frost to kill the beans. And then after the frost comes, you know, you'll still get nice, warm, sunny days, and that dries up all the leaves on the plants. And that's when you pick the whole bean plant and you toss it up in the barn mall or somewhere in your garage or somewhere. But the beauty of the frost was that it killed all the leaves, the green leaves. And now sometimes you have to pick them. We haven't had a frost yet, and those leaves are still green and living, and so there's a lot of moisture in the plant. And that's where your uh, mold and rot can happen. And so I never thought about that until I noticed that we don't get that killing frost too much.
So, from being your student, I for a little bit, I remember you would talk about maple tapping, and since this episode is going to be released around like the time of maple tapping, could you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, I learned my maple tapping from Norton Rickard, going and visiting him and how he did it. And so I just had a lot of fun going down there, sitting around the fire, and riding the tractor and wagon down in the woods. And you know, he'd stay on the tractor, and I'd jump down and get the barrels. He would jump down too, but as you know, as you get older, it's hard to get up and down that tractor. So you know, I'd jump down and get it when I was there. Otherwise, it would be George and helping him. You know, but it was just a lot of fun learning about the trees, how to tap, and what to look for in the woods, and how you look at the trees, the maple trees, and what's a good tree to tap, and which ones you don't want to tap, and you know, he had a good ethic about him. He only used one tap per tree. You see some of these professional guys, and they'll have two, three, four taps on a tree, depending how big it is. And like Norton would say, though, that sap is their food, and you can't take all their food. You know, they need it too. And he had this patch of woods down there along the ridge with a stream that cut through the middle of it. And so he even would be even gentler on the sugar bush by tapping one side of the stream, east side 1 year. The next year he'd do the west side. So the trees all got a full year's break before he went back and tapped them. So I always remember that lesson. You know, take care of that forest, take care of that sugar bush, and they'll take care of you. They're willingly share with you, but you can't be greedy, you know. And he made the old-fashioned wooden spiles out of the sumacs that his dad taught him how to make, and so I try to use those. I don't tap all the time because I don't have easy access to trees. Um, and I don't have a tractor or four-wheeler or snowmobile. But
Especially snowmobile now.
yeah. And so yeah, I go down. George keeps it going, and then George boys are continuing the tradition down there. But yeah, so maple tapping is a super fun time of the year. Can be cold in the beginning. You get some rough weather, but by the end of the season, you can really see spring happen while you're maple tapping because it's almost like still winter as you when you start, and by the time you're done with that last tapping, it's like spring is here, and so it's just an amazing time to be in the woods again. You're just spending hours and hours in the woods, especially when it's boiling time. You're there sometimes 24, 36 hours keeping that fire going.
So, like, throughout the years, how have you noticed kind of the environment around you, or like the maple trees, change the most?
I haven't really noticed, but I know I hear talk about maple trees like a certain coldness, and that's why they only grow up in the northeast part of Turtle Island here in North America. So I do hear people say that the trees are kind of moving north. Their southern boundary is moving north. The new trees aren't surviving, aren't growing. Somebody else said there's a new disease starting to hit maples, and that's got a lot of people worried. But personally, I haven't really seen that myself yet here. Maybe I'm just not outside there enough. But the one thing that is I notice also is it seems like weather, like the winter fluctuates between really warm winters and then a little bit of cold and really warm. And when I first started maple tapping with Norton, when it was winter, it stayed cold all the way until late February, early March when this warm weathers came. And so now I've heard people can actually get sap from a tree sometimes in January, because we get those warm spells. And so it's not a consistent cold all through winter anymore, at least around here it's not. And I just wonder how that's going to affect things. I don't know, but it just seems the inconsistency of the cold weathers affecting at least the maple tapping.
Yeah, I remember last year, someone who taps out here, he doesn't tap like normally,
Mm,
but he said that he started in January,
yeah,
like mid-January, and I'm like, that's crazy.
yeah,
When I think of it, I would think of like February,
mm-hmm,
the month to do that.
right. So I don't know how that's going to affect the trees, but we got a pretty cold January going on now, so hopefully that'll help. But I don't know.
So, since you were in elementary or like a teacher, how have you kind of noticed a little bit of a disconnect from the environment with our youth?
Uh, in my experience, I worked, oh my gosh, for 28 years, 28 and a half years. Um, it seems like kids are not outdoors as much as we were. And at the risk of sounding like an old fuddy-duddy here, I think it has a lot to do with, at least for boys, it has a lot to do with the gaming. And they had all these games as kids, and now, the cell phones. Everyone's got a cell phone, so that takes all their time. And, our time was spent outdoors. We had parents that, you know, if you were laying around in the house, get the heck out of here, you do something, go on outside. And so, yeah, so we wanted to be outside, and your parents wanted you to be outside. So you just had a ton of time to be outdoors playing and running and in the woods. Everybody did that, and so you learned firsthand about nature, I think. And I forget, like how many of us hunted and fished, and you always run into people in the woods hunting or fishing as we're cruising around the woods, and you knew you're part of the res by heart, all the trails and all the woods and fields and swamps, um and of course that there's knowledge that goes with that. Your dads, your uncles, and your grandparents are teaching you about all that sort of stuff, the plants and the animals and how to hunt and how to trap. And so you came in to school with a pretty good knowledge of all of that, and then you shared with each other, you visited each other and did that sort of stuff. And we're just not I'm just not seeing, at least the boys. I don't know, what the girls' pastimes are, but for the boys, it's not nearly as many boys doing that as there used to be. There still are. I'm not saying nobody does, but it's not like it used to be.
Because when I think about like being a student for you, I would always remember that you would always take us outside and like teach us about the plants.
Hmm.
I don't know. I would always remember, I think I remember one lesson you taught us about black walnuts, and I've been harassing my mom in the fall time to get black walnuts. And I said that to her last year, and we just never did it. And I'm like, come on, I know where to get them.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean the black walnuts was, and I was lucky. Literally, my mom's house where I lived, we had like 9 or 10 big black walnut trees around the house. And here at Tuscarora, we're just lucky we have black walnuts all over in our community. Um, my father-in-law's community down at Newtown, they don't have that many black walnuts, So I used to take some down there and get them started, and we'd plant some black walnuts here and there in his woods. And but they had a ton of mm, anisnachi, um, kappa. Can't think of the translation anisnachi, sassafras. And so then we would dig up some sassafras, and I'd bring them back up here and transplant some baby sassafras. So that was kind of a neat thing to do. But my mom would always have us, pick up some and save them for her for eating or using for cooking. But us boys have to crack them open because they're pretty tough to crack open. But yeah, I mean, 9, 10 trees around the house every fall. We were picking up literally thousands of walnuts. And, we just cart them with a wheelbarrow or buckets into the woods and in the bush line there and make big piles. And the squirrels loved it. We did all the work for them. They would just come eat. But yeah, I still pick them up. And I got a couple of boxes in the garage right now, black walnuts. So if you need some, I can get you some.
I'll think about that.
Yeah, they're delicious. I love them. Some people think they're too strong because they're used to English walnuts. And our black walnuts have a much stronger flavor to them.
I haven't had any in quite a while, but I was interviewing an elder, Norma Jacobs from
Mm,
Six Nations, and she actually brought up the point of how we don't really eat or like forage like we used to, and
yeah,
what those foods used to do for us, like for
absolutely.
our brains or like the oils from the nuts, what they would do.
Yeah, and like dietitians and people that study that stuff, the nut oils are the healthy oils,
Mhm.
and it is important for your brain and the rest of your body. And that stuff is basically free food. It just
Yeah.
falls from the air above us, and you just gotta pick them up. Lately, been getting into the last few years acorns, just
Oh yeah, I've heard about that.
gathering acorns, and last couple of years we did it with the kids in school. Made acorn flour and then made cookies with the acorn flour. And it's unbelievably good, but there's just a ton of acorns out here too.
At my old, I think there's some acorns there. I don't know about at where I live now, but I think there's some acorns at my old house.
Yeah, we got a lot of oaks here. You just got to find a good spot because squirrels. It's tough to beat the squirrels, yeah. But if you find a good patch where there's 5, 6 big oaks, then you should be okay because they can't get all of
So, my last question is, what message do you have for the youth today and the future generations?
them. Get outside, get outside and explore. I know sometimes modern parents are nervous about kids being outside, but that's up to them. But we were always outside, so you just got to get out there, and whether it's in your garden, get a garden going. That's a great activity for a family, especially kids. Teaches them a little work ethic, gives them some knowledge, and it's been amazing at school. We had our garden. How many kids will actually eat Brussels sprouts or whatever veggie that normally you would think people don't like, but when they've actually planted and weeded and took care of it, and they actually helped pick it, and then I'd have the kids help cook it. It made a world of difference. It's like, oh my gosh, I've had my hands on this, and so I bet you I've had probably 95% of kids like or at least eat the vegetables, any vegetable we grow. There's something there. There's a connection, spiritual connection or some sort of psychological connection to that food when you actually put the work in and you just learn so much. So it doesn't matter whether it's gardening, hunting, fishing, find people in your family or, your relatives that can still share messages with you and show you how things are done. But we got to get people back connected to the land. We can't just be in buildings and cars and,
Yep.
we lose a connection if we do that.
And that's all that I have. So, Nyawa, for allowing me to interview you and take time out of your busy day.
Oh, now this is great. I'm glad you're doing this.
As Haudenosaunee, we have different philosophies of the environment and the world we live in. The Haudenosaunee Environmental Task Force brought together like-minded people to write the words that come before all else. This book goes into all the sections of the Ganonyok, or the Thanksgiving address, to give thanks to all the natural world, one of our first responsibilities as humans. Since in this episode we talked about the maple trees, I'm going to go through the section that talks about the trees. The trees provide a living example of how we should live our lives and conduct our actions, how we need each other to protect one another to benefit all life. The leader of all the trees is the maple. It provides us with the first medicine food of the spring, which helps renew our strength and reminds us of our continual responsibility to give thanks to them. The power of trees is not limited to what we can see, feel, use, or eat. Humans out of control use up oxygen in their burning and manufacturing processes. A single tree acts as a more efficient air scrubber than most machines we can devise, absorbing CO2, airborne metals, contaminants, and other suspended particulates. This is done while consuming only renewable energy through the process of photosynthesis to replenish much of the world's oxygen supply. We lose our forests to agriculture and cities. The rainforests, which contain half of the known species in the world, are being harvested at increasing rates. 1/3 of the forests of the world are gone. Most of the deforestation has been in the last century, and most of that in the last 30 years. Because of deforestation, the rising amounts of CO2, and the lowering amount of trees to help clean the air, it forces the small population to take on the responsibility to clean the air for all living things that depend on oxygen for life, causing the trees to work extra to help provide clean air. One way that you can help is to start planting trees, but make sure that you're doing research into the trees that are native to the area you inhabit. You could also check your local county soil and water conservation district for when tree saplings are available in the spring. To find out when new episodes are released, follow Haudenosaunee Environmental Task Force on Facebook and Voices for the Earth on Instagram. I would also like to say Nyawa to Aaron Printup for the music. Nyawa for listening.
Kayowane, 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 kayowane.